Okay, so just introduce us and then hit the down arrow for the next slide. It was going to be here.
All right. I'd like to welcome all of you to our very first blockchain for business sponsored by Blueberry Consulting. My name is Charles Obong. I am the co-organizer. I'm a blockchain enthusiast. This is Easy. He owns and runs Blueberry Consulting. And this is Ray, who's going to be presenting this evening. So the reason we put this together is there's been quite a bit of interest in blockchain. So many companies are doing proof of concept. And so, as always, when you're entering a hot space, talent become scarce, right? So our objective is to aggregate and create a pool of blockchain talent that we can do a knowledge exchange. But what motivated this is just if you've read any blockchain article at all, any technical magazine in the last year, you'll see such headlines as blockchain moves into top spot for hardest jobs. This is Computer World, and I think TechCrunch. Blockchain engineers are in high demand. I mean, the job growth are pretty significant. The challenge is how do you find blockchain engineers and talent? Currently, there's 14 job openings for every blockchain developer that's available. Right? There's 14 job listings that is jobs that they can't fill. Blockonomy. The headline was Global Blockchain Hiring Spree. Jobs is 300% in a year. Major companies now, startups in blockchain space are competing with companies, established companies like IBM and Microsoft, and obviously Amazon. Each one of those companies is rolling out their own blockchain fabric and platform now. Here's one more headline. So how do we bridge this gap between available jobs and talent and engineers? IBM and MasterCard just filed 80 patents, each for blockchain-related technology. So as I indicated earlier, we want to create an environment where we can now exchange knowledge. We can aggregate blockchain talent that we can exchange information and knowledge, and we invite you to join this community. Thank you.
Hello guys, I know it's kind of a little weird for me, and I'm Easy. I go by Easy. It's a pretty long name. So I've been in Seattle for almost 20 years. So I was a solution architect in Microsoft, and before that, AT&T architect. There's many roles I played. And the blockchain is kind of exciting. So I started knowing about more and more. Then we are more focused on, at least my focus is more, how do I can use some of the new cutting edge technology into, healthcare, or farming, or some other thing which is really technology need help, which we can make a big difference in human life. So that's kind of my focus area. Okay, how do I can take the new technology, putting into healthcare or farming areas, or aeronautics, space, right? There's a lot of areas which we can able to make a big difference using some of the technologies, not only for blockchain, AI, cognitive part, and so on. So that's how we kind of just brainstorming, a few times, and we met people around same interest. Then we were looking for, okay, is there any blockchain community in Bellevue or the east side? We couldn't find the right one. So we thought, okay, and also we've been hearing from this, Charles, my co-manager, so we're kind of digging into more into blockchain. So there's plenty of opportunities in blockchain. Then we said, okay, there is an opportunity there. There is not enough people who trained and learned. And I see some of the, organizations who run trainings, which is pretty expensive for people to go and learn and know about the technology before you use it. But if you look at this blockchain innovation, the ultimate goal is to open source, right? They want more people to get benefit out of their systems using the new technology, rather than, it's only reachable by a elite type of people who can able to afford and use it. So that's why it's kind of open source, so everybody can use it. So I don't see much talent around this area, so I thought, okay, let's start something and start building in the community. So we can share the knowledge what we, people work in different industries and different verticals. So they have different challenges. So we can see how the blockchain can fit in. So I've been to a couple of conferences on a blockchain in LA, which is the one which is an international conference. So there is still, you try to figure out what's the best way to use a blockchain in a corporate world. There's a lot of use cases in place, but it's not, if you look at a smart contract, or fleet management, or supply chain tracking, those are some of the things which obviously people knows they can be able to use it. But a full-scale use of, in a corporate world, besides that, the coin world, using a normal business to run in blockchain, it's a very minimum and a complete production level of execution. But there's a lot of interest. People are looking for a lot of talent. Okay, I want to try something out, and with a small set of people, see how that works for my company. Then probably I can invest more to build bigger. Same time, the industry also evolving. The technology is brand new, right? Every week probably had something new coming out. So I met with Ray. Ray have been working on. Me and Ray work native, in a Microsoft for almost 10 years. So we're in the same team, so we know for a long time. Then he moved on to Amazon. Then now he's kind of stepping into the blockchain, training people, and he's more savvy on the domain aspect. So that's why we start using Ray as an expert to come over and start doing it. So this meetup is not just come talk about the business opportunities or what isn't for you, what isn't for me. It's more like, okay, as a community, what we can do, the technology, how do we can embrace the technology a little bit more, take it to the next level, so corporate can benefit out of it. So it's not only for just a meetup. We want to go a little different approach of how we want to have it, which is more like a training kind of sessions, like you going to work on hands-on experience by doing the blockchain. So I understand what the blockchain does, how it works. So it's much more a great curiosity for people to learn a little bit more about it. So that's kind of my objective, why we are here, why we started it. This is our first event. Hopefully the next time onwards we'll see more traction and more people coming in to the event. Thank you. Back to Ray.
All right. Thanks, Ez.
All right, I'm gonna try to stand on this side so we can get the screen there. All right, so I'll introduce myself real fast, and then we'll go over the agenda. You guys can maybe check in just.
That's open source, so.
Yeah, that's one of the things which my personal benefit.
You can see if it comes back, Charles. I think it will.
Private blockchain, but Ray is kind of he knows public
Yeah.
private. He's been creating content on.
Well, yeah, as a curriculum designer, right, you wanna have this broad scope and then narrow in.
So he's not only for kind of, he's interested in, he's doing the blockchain, he's one of his clients, and he's an hands-on guy. He's not just a typical corporate trader who comes in and training things. He's been in the blockchain for quite some time.
Oh, yeah,
5 years.
totally. Oh, and
So he knows
he's a
hands-on what it is.
technologist, right? He
Then he
works
just,
with it.
okay, he thought, I have it for, let me share this as a training curriculum. He started building for one of the Seattle blockchain community. He's been training with that, and he's doing it. Just drag his stuff.
That's a good idea.
Getting customers, get the knowledge of this.
So tell me a little bit more about Blueberry.
So Blueberry standpoint, we are more consulting company, and also we're working on our own product. We wanted to make sure, use the technology to make people like it. That's the main objective. So we are focusing on healthcare, we are focusing on public sectors, we are focusing on farming. How we can make some of the things very complex and we can decouple it. So we use typical software platforms like Microsoft or AWS or two solutions. And also we kind of mention the IoT space a little bit. So we try to build IoT. So I have a team in India, probably 40 people team in India. I have 3 consultants here, they're working across, trying to make it. So we want to see what's the new technology. This blockchain is completely, it's still a buzzword. Not many people using it, besides the coin and exchange and the digital currencies are one, kind of attracting more people than a typical business use case. So my goal is promoting those, how do we can take it to the corporate world, which do something different. How do we can use the technology to frame it. That's kind of our focus area. And we've been in business for 4 years almost, as a Blueberry company. And the blockchain is kind of what's new for us. And so we plan to start this kind of series once a month or probably 45 days once. We wanted to make this as a more training kind of a environment. So people come and learn and share their knowledge and others can learn too. So it's kind of a collectively we can all learn and contribute to the blockchain. So that's kind of the main objective why you want to do it. And then everybody works in for you, right? You're spending 90 minutes, you want to make sure
Sure.
we share valuable of it. At least 15 minutes of the time. It's much more worth it than we are here. So that's why we kind of refining ourselves. And we are big fan of Six Sigma. We want to make sure the process is lean and make sure that everything is targeted to the audience what they want, rather than what we know. So that's why I'm just poking you guys through something what you guys need. Specifically, we can try to dip, and if we don't, we can try to find an answer for you guys. Make sense?
Yeah, so what I just finished saying while you were gone was, like, we know a lot about public blockchains because the code is open source, we get to dig into it. But as far as private blockchains, like, it's less open source, so that's probably more of a obscured area for us that we'd like to know more about. Is there anything else that you'd like to know more about? That you want to get out of this session?
I'm curious about how you do smart contracts in private blockchains.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I can answer a real deep technical, but I can definitely tell like practical how you write a smart contract and get it to execute and the security, that kind of stuff. Okay, I'll get into the Hyperledger. So you guys probably know a lot about this public versus private. All right, so Hyperledger, it's an umbrella project under the Linux Foundation. If you go out to the Linux Foundation, they have a list of projects that's probably 100 projects big, and most of the names none of us have heard of. So Hyperledger is just one of those many projects in the Linux Foundation. And then within Hyperledger, Hyperledger is not a foundation, I forget what they would call them, a consortium or something. But within Hyperledger, there's another collection of projects. There's like a dozen or maybe even 20 different projects underneath the Hyperledger umbrella. And they're not all compatible. They're not, they're just kind of like funded together. So most of these Hyperledger projects, they all fit this idea of blockchain, and several of them are kind of core blockchains in themselves. Like we're talking about Fabric today, but there's Ahora and Sawtooth. I forget all the names of the other ones. So I just want to explain that when people say Hyperledger, most of the time they're talking about Hyperledger Fabric, but technically Hyperledger is a lot of different things. Just like if I said Linux, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's that command line, it's that OS. But really, there's another Linux out there that's the foundation that has 100 different products that doesn't have anything to do with the OS and the command line. So just so you know that differentiator, so somebody could say Hyperledger and not be talking about Fabric, not be talking about the product we're talking about tonight. So it's a blockchain, so the rights are shared by multiple parties. These could be partners or customers, even competitors. Why would competitors share a blockchain? If I go into Avis and rent a car and trash it and never return it, and then next time I go to Budget and rent a car, you know, they want to share information with their competitors, but it's the benefit of all parties to have a shared ledger. And without the blockchain, they all have to either say, well, Budget's got the best list of crooks, and they open up their portal to us to write into this shared ledger that Budget owns. Or if they wanted to make it more decentralized, they could all pitch in, say, 20 or 30 grand and make a company that they all own like a 1/10 share in, and then that company could manage that information. But now we've got this blockchain software where they can all install their own node. They all sync up, and they know that the information is safe and secure and has followed the rules of the smart contracts. It should be less expensive than the other options and more trusted than the other options. So the Hyperledger Foundation works on projects that are have a lot of those concepts, the blockchain concepts. The security features of Hyperledger, all their products are very limited. If you compare this to Oracle or SQL Server, we think of the blockchain as the super secure system, and Bitcoin is unhackable and Ethereum, but those are very limited cases, and it's not like if you put in Oracle database, they have pages and pages in the manual of all these different security features and all these options: row level security, column level security, security using stored procedures, and then all these other features. Whereas blockchain is just like you got your private key, and that secures you, so you can say who you are and you can move your funds around, but that's it. So how do you map today's business into the blockchain with those limited security features? They're very strong, but they're not full-fledged. Hyperledger is a public and open source. Everything in their whole consortium is open source. So you can go out to hyperledger.org to see their projects. You can go to github.com/hyperledger, see all their projects, and then we'll talk about Composer. I should probably move that to the other slide. Okay, so the most popular software of all the Hyperledger components, that dozen components or maybe even 20, the one that was, I don't know if it was first, but it was definitely the industry was behind this Fabric project. And IBM had initially started it, and actually they're still probably the biggest contributor to the space. But Fabric is it's a private blockchain. It's popular, like it's probably the most popular private blockchain out there. You can run Ethereum in a private mode. You could run it behind a firewall, but it's not as popular. It's hugely popular in the public blockchain space, but to put Ethereum behind a firewall is, it's more popular than a lot of the other tiny coins that I've dealt with, but it's, I would say Hyperledger is like top tier as far as actual use and industry interest. It's a private blockchain, so the data is shared with the companies you allow, so that those questions on the public versus private slide, Fabric is all about the private side. There's no internet users that can access it. Nobody can just create an account. It's all managed privately. So all the nodes are kept behind corporate firewalls. Technically, you could install it and just open it up to the public, but I don't know anybody who's doing that. Your security in Hyperledger is, are you guys doing that? I saw the smile.
No, I just thought it was funny the way you said it.
Oh, okay. I would say that Hyperledger, you can connect to the public network through some interfaces like that portal. Like if Amazon and Walmart wanted a blockchain, they could use Hyperledger behind their firewall, and then they could allow the public to view it or make changes to it through portals. But I don't know that they would just take Hyperledger and like expose it to the public. So there's a differentiation there.
That's also the commoditization, right? That's how they make money. People at IBM has one, Microsoft is coming up with one, Amazon is coming up with one. So they can already have a big cloud footprint. So they want to put those nodes across, make sure they control it. So it's much more safer than corporate where people can build it.
Yeah. So before the blockchain, we've had databases for how many years? And databases are generally secure. I mean, we do read the news articles that this company got hacked and their data got shared, but I don't think a blockchain is going to solve that problem. Like if you put all your data on a blockchain and then even a private blockchain and your network gets hacked, that data is out there. So it's not like blockchain is securing your data, or what should I say?
The data are encrypted.
It's not encrypting your data. Blockchains don't encrypt data. Like that's not a feature. Like when I put if I'm using Bitcoin or Ethereum, all that data is public, and it's mapped to my my hashed account number. But it's not encrypted. It's just that nobody can affect that data. Nobody can make it move to somebody else's account unless I sign a transaction with my private key, but it's not encrypted. It's not like a feature. It's probably a good thing to put on the slide, that you don't just get 100% security with your blockchain.
What is the crypto concept of cryptography involved in the whole transaction scheme?
That's probably for the future session. It's like, I mean, I can talk about it during QA if we want to spend the time there.
I was thinking like every transaction, probably you guys can answer it more because you're.
But like,
is a transaction transparent, readable, or is it we cannot able to we cannot able to open up and read what it is? The party who's exchanging between these two.
Yeah, it depends on like the blockchain actually. So like with Bitcoin and Ethereum, like transactions are fairly transparent. You can see the front and two addresses in the amount. There's certain blockchains like Monero or Zcash where like everything is encrypted, and like in some cases like, you don't even know the total supply invariant, which is kind of weird.
yeah,
Usually the case though that the wallet itself is what get hacked, but not the actual.
Yeah, like.
I think the wallet is much more susceptible, or the exchanges are much more susceptible to hacking.
If you're a blockchain user, your data on the blockchain is not encrypted. It's there for everybody to see, but I can't move it around. I can see it, but I can't move it around. Only you can. And when I hack you, I'm basically assuming your identity. There's nothing on the blockchain that I can hack. I need to basically find your private key. And once I find your private key, then the blockchain thinks that I am you, and then it lets me move the funds.
Still, the people are in the specific node in the private world who will get access to the node. They're the only one able to see it. It's not anybody can come in and see it.
Yeah. So the technology, like the blockchain part of Hyperledger, is not going to secure the data. It's not going to like encrypt or hide the data necessarily. But if you install that Hyperledger data on one node and another node and then not on the third node won't have access because it's not installed there. But if that person gets to your node, then the data is there, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if. Let's get into that in the Q&A because I think we'll try to finish this up. Okay, so all the nodes in Hyperledger, they're all paid for privately. And you don't, if you talk about public versus private, in a public blockchain, if you disappear, the public is still out there. There's still a community. And so if I create an account and somebody puts some funds in mine and I move them around or put some data on the blockchain and then I just leave, the community is going to keep that is going to maintain that data indefinitely. But in a private blockchain, all the nodes and the ownership is kind of a known thing. So if you quit paying your AWS bill, then it's gone. And if your blockchain is small, like if we use Amazon and Walmart, and that's the only two participants, and they both quit paying their bill, then that data, there's no other community to hold that data. So when you say the word immutable, it's kind of a gray area. How immutable is it? It's immutable as long as people continue to pay the bills. But it's a public blockchain is immutable because the community is not you. You're you're less than 1% of that community. So when you give your data to the community, you know, there's nothing you can do to lose it.
You being in public, it's once a day, whatever. Private, you can at least, there's a all party of the consensus, you can able to go now, everything is beyond.
And that can be good and bad. I mean, if you have data on your blockchain and then there's a GDPR law that you can't remember a customer or something, well, if you happen to have chose a public network and you put some data out there, you know, you don't have control over that. You published it, you know, to somebody else. Whereas a private blockchain, if you really wanted to, you know, who knows how long Hyperledger is going to last? Is it going to be around 20 years from now? We don't know. So how many times have companies migrated their data from one database platform to another? You know, as painful as that is, it happens. You spin up the new system, you run a report on the old stuff or an extract, you import it in the new one, then you turn off the old system. So if that's your style, then the blockchain, you can't really say it's immutable, you know, because you could export the data and say, well, all those old transactions that are already closed out or all those mistakes, we're not going to put in the new system. You know, so it's nice to have that flexibility. Like as a corporation, those are really valuable features. But, you know, when you say it's an immutable blockchain, that means different things in different contexts. The other thing with Fabric is there's no native coin or currency. You can't buy Fabric coins. You can't invest in it. The reason blockchain coins exist is, you know, initially is to pay the miners. Like people are not going to run a node and not going to validate transactions and join the community unless there's something in it for them, unless their electricity costs are paid for and their time and effort. So this whole concept of Bitcoins and Ethereums is created to make that community and make that market so that you can afford to pay your power bill to run the server. With Hyperledger, you just pay AWS, you pay Azure, you run it on-prem. So that whole concept of coins and paying miners is pointless on a private blockchain. Now, could you create a coin? Sure, you can, you know, write a smart contract and make any coin you want, just like you could create a coin with Oracle or SQL Server or MySQL. But is it common? No. It's not really common that you do coins in.
I mean, today involved in the loyalty programs, right? Every company has a loyalty program.
Mm-hmm. You could do airline miles.
The Starbucks can take run the whole loyalty program in a private blockchain.
Right.
So that's much more beneficial. Even now I heard Emirates and a couple of airlines all implemented blockchain for running the whole loyalty programs.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, we're closing in, we've got like a couple more slides, and we'll get to a more open thing. So Composer, I just want to talk about the Composer component. So Composer was envisioned as a kind of a starting, easy to use beginner's tool, like training wheels basically, for multiple Hyperledger projects. That was kind of the idea behind Composer. But Fabric was the only project at the time that was actually working. The rest of them were just kind of like not quite operational. So Composer kind of married in with Fabric and worked, became hugely popular. But Composer never really fit with any of the other blockchains in the Hyperledger ecosystem. And so the question kind of got asked, why do we have Composer separate from Fabric? Why don't we just put all the Composer features right into Fabric, since it's only works with Fabric anyway? And so basically, Composer makes development easier. It gives you a UI. If you imagine like installing MySQL, and not having the MySQL workbench. Everything's command line, you know, and you have to just create all your tables manually and there's no GUI. That's like Fabric. Fabric doesn't have any sort of UI. It's just some back-end server components. There's a collection of about 8 commands. I've got them on my website, just an overview of some of the commands and components. But Composer just exposes all that. Now it has a nice API, a nice UI. It's not something that you would give to a bank teller or a grocery store to use. It's a developer facing, just like MySQL Workbench is a query designer and table designer that's developer facing, but it makes it approachable so you can see what's going on. So when you learn Hyperledger, basically all the web examples are going to tell you install Composer, learn Composer. It's really hard, unless you're just a command line hacker, computer science type of person, you're probably not going to just use Fabric. And, you can install Fabric alone without Composer, and that is the recommended way if you're doing like corporate design and everything. But when you're just trying to understand how does this thing work, you would use Composer. And like I say, they're going to kind of merge that in anyway, I think. So Composer, it's not a blockchain. Fabric is your blockchain. Composer does have kind of an in-memory fake blockchain. So if you don't have Fabric up and running, it'll still work. You also get Composer on a website. So you can just go out on Google and search for Composer Playground or Composer IBM, and it'll be one of the first links. So we'll actually demo it. I think at the last slide we demo it. Or you can connect to your local Fabric environment. You can install Fabric on your laptop and use Composer to connect to your Fabric. So Composer, it's a JavaScript environment. All the smart contracts are written in JavaScript. And the problem with this is if you write your smart contracts using JavaScript, and there's all these templates, and it's easy to copy and paste and modify it to what you want. Beautiful system. But if you ever try to run the smart contracts without Composer, it fails. The whole, the Composer JavaScript won't even compile on its own. It requires Composer to run. So basically you have to teach yourself JavaScript, teach yourself smart contracts, use it in Composer, and then when you're done, take just your high-level design docs and go over to Fabric and basically reteach yourself and write them in Java or Golang. Now, version 1.4, which is not quite out yet, they're in the middle of writing it, actually has a JavaScript on Fabric feature. But we don't know if it's the JavaScript that you write in Composer or if it's some other special JavaScript. So this is like, version 0 software. So like if I were teaching a class, I would definitely teach Composer because, if you just have to learn Fabric alone and you have to, basically if people are smart enough to learn Fabric alone, they don't need me. They just go home and hack away and teach themselves. But Composer is more like that Microsoft Access or whatever, where you can kind of approach it. So it's a development environment, it's a test UI. You can execute your chain code on there. You can create assets. So on the second page of the handout, I have a section for assets, and we'll talk about what that is. And then you get the sample library in Composer, which has all this chain code already written up. And it's a wonderful tool. You also get this code migration. Unfortunately, the code won't migrate into Fabric. But if you have Composer, as part of your server components, you can actually deploy Composer code all the way into production. It's just that you always need Composer, the server components of it, running for that code to work. Like if you're going to use the training wheels to develop, you have to use the training wheels in production. The other thing is there is one security feature that Hyperledger has where, let's say you had 6 nodes and 2 of them were at your partner and 4 of them were your organization. and you wanted to use Hyperledger for some of your internal stuff, and then you also want to use Hyperledger that's shared with that partner. So it has a feature called channels where you can define 2 channels, one for your internal stuff and one for everybody, and then you just let your partner access the one channel and not your channel. So this gets to some of that security. It's not that you're encrypting the data, it's not even going out over the network to your partner. Well, if you decide to put your Composer code in production, you can't do multiple channels. That's like a feature that's not available. But you could install Hyperledger twice and have one network with them and one without, and both of those networks could be done on Composer. It's just you can't share a node and use the channel feature. Anyway, that's kind of trivia. Okay. So that's kind of the end of the Hyperledger feature overview. We don't have time to actually use it and go deep into it, but we talked through this use case briefly. This is just like a training use case. So if I were to take the 5 of us and put us in a list, and I wanted these Seattle blockchain contacts to be shared by some people who operate nodes, like you may be willing to run a node and I'm willing to run a node, we can sync up the same blockchain, and if I put 3 of us in and he puts 2 of us in, we'll both have the same list, and it's immutable. We can't delete it. Like once the data goes in there, we're in there. And then if you guys wanted to join in and be a 3rd node, you would just be able to sync and you'd get those 5 contacts on yours. So I wrote, for this use case or demo or whatever, keep it simple, get version 1 operational. It's hard enough without adding scope. And the asset is kind of like a table. Like in SQL, you would call it a table. In Hyperledger, you call it an asset. You might have, so the name of the asset would be contact, and you would have first, last, phone, and email. And we can all think of 20 other fields that it would be great to know about the blockchain community, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to make relationships and multiple things for this starter use case. So you just make one asset, 4 fields, and the 2 nodes, and try to get them to sync over the internet. And then you have to put some kind of UI on top of it, or some way to get data in there. So that's something that we'd like to do as Blueberry and as this group. Just go through and actually get our hands dirty and set this thing up. And with that experience, we could then parlay it into, find out what a business wants, or what maybe it's a homeless shelter. So we're going to connect all the homeless shelters and let them share a phone book or something like that. And then you could have bigger scope. But I wouldn't want to take on some 10-table project, as a first use case.
So we're going to make it simple. Mm-hmm. Start using it. Then see where we go as a team. And evolve.
Yep. And for hosting, there's a couple services that just launched. Amazon Managed Blockchain, Azure Blockchain Workbench, IBM, Oracle. There's other people that are joining this Hyperledger community, and they're running, these are managed services. So if you think of EMR on AWS, there's a service called EMR. I forget what it's called in. No, EMR is Elastic Map Reduce, and it's Hadoop. But you could go to the, and I need to get up on the Azure, the names of all the little components. This group is going to be mostly focused around Azure, but my background is mostly around AWS, just because I worked at Microsoft, or at both of them. Basically, if I log into AWS and I use their EC2 feature, which is just the compute, just a node, it's like $20 a month to run a small node. And that's big enough for me to put Hyperledger on there. And then if he does the same, we can get ours talking, and for $40 a month, we can have this contact list operational. Well, if we use this service or this service, it's about $1,000 a month. And that's kind of the difference between just getting the bare metal and then you do all the work, versus saying, hey, Microsoft Azure, I want you to give me a fully managed service. So I just hit Hyperledger, spin up. Those are the ones that are like $1,000 a month. So we're not planning on doing those in this group. And then there's on-premise hosting. You can run it on your laptop. Hard to stay on the internet all day with that, but you can run it on Linux or Windows. Usually it works better on Linux, but I heard from my last meetup, I did an install meetup, and we talked about Windows, and somebody from the audience said, like 6 months ago, he couldn't get it to work at all on Windows, but now they've updated and it works fine on Windows. So that's a new option. And then from a DevOps perspective, whenever you're hosting anything, think about the upgrades. Think about data migration, service migrations. The cool thing about Hyperledger Fabric is these would be compatible. So I can spin up mine on AWS, you can spin up yours on Microsoft, and we can talk to each other. So that's cool. And then I can show you the demo real quick. You guys have any questions before a quick demo?
I'm wondering about this asset table. This asset. Is that like a table that you can like add, append to, and delete from, or is it like a journal?
It's a journal, but there is a delete operation, which just says, let's add a record to the journal that says, don't look at that record.
Okay.
But it's still there. So you could go back in the point in time and you would see it. And then they have a second database. There's 2 copies in the background where one just has the current data and one is the full ledger of all the changes. So the current data is more efficient to query, whereas the other one's for auditing or whatever. Let me just do this so I don't hunch over too bad. Okay. So Composer, let me see if I can, guess I'll just show you how to find it.
It's Brave.
Of course. This is the new Brave too. I don't know if you've seen this interface, but this is all new. Tonight was the first night I saw these. These are completely new UI in Brave. Have you seen this?
I've been setting myself tips.
Okay, nice. I haven't, I'm actually not a big fan of the tipping system, but I like Brave. Okay, so I just searched for Composer IBM, and somewhere, I would imagine, I want to see Blue Mix. Yeah, it's this one. And the link's in the slides. The slides are on the meetup, so you're welcome to grab a copy of those. But in Composer, these are all the samples that are out there. So if I choose a sample and deploy it, it's just deploying in memory. I'm connecting to it in memory. I can go up here to test, and these are my assets. So I've got a grower asset. It's just like these are my tables. I've got my grower table, my importer. I say that because I'm a database guy, but if you're a Java guy, you might say these are my objects or my whatever you call them. Okay, you can see they're all empty, right? So there's a smart contract that will populate these for me as a demo. So in a moment, I'll click on these same 3 and you'll see data in there. And then we could try to delete it, change it, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go to Submit Transaction. Setup Demo is the name of the transaction. Submit. And now when I click on Grower, I see farmer at email.com, supermarket at email.com, and shipper at email.com. I've also got a contract between them which says as long as the temperature doesn't drop or doesn't raise to, like say I'm transporting fish. So as long as the temperature doesn't go above 40 degrees, I'll pay for the fish. If somewhere in the shipping we take a temperature reading and it's above 40, then I'm not going to pay for these fish. And then this is like the shipment. So it's like 5 tables that are kind of interrelated in this sample. So if I were to go up here to grower and edit it. I could say the country is the USAA and update. And now when I go to grower, show all, it says USAA. So I modified a record on the blockchain. Well, what actually happened was, I believe should be on here. Not sure if I can find it in this UI.
Update participant.
Update part, oh, yeah, okay, it gave me this, but why is setup demo? Maybe I just have to sort it by date time. I'm not sure. I do see the update USAA here, and let me see if I can find the old, here's the add participant, and this still, nope. Maybe it's under events. I see 0 events. I'm not sure on that one. I know that it does let me delete, so I can just delete this and it'll be gone. I'm not sure if this, oh, here's the remove participant. So I think that first USA was the setup demo. So if I go into setup demo, I don't know if it shows on the site, but that's where the original name was. And now here's the remove record, and then the old USAA is still there.
Down
on the remove or?
on the transact, no, go back to the update participant record.
Okay.
And then in the, yeah, in that box, I think you can scroll down. Oh, no, nothing there.
Yeah. I think that the first, like if, okay, so let me try this again. This first record, I believe it's just in the smart contract. Like we won't see this record at all. This one says this guy is in the UK. So if I go to transactions, there's nothing, I'm on the importer. There's no importer record and there's nothing about the UK in there. So that one's just kind of like hidden because it was created by a different smart contract, the setup demo. But if I were to change this twice, so if I say UK1 update and UK2 update, and then go, I'll have 2 transactions, and this one will say UK1, which it does, and this one says UK2. So you can see the blockchain history is kind of a built-in feature. You can edit your data, you can delete your data, but there's a full log. And then in addition, and we won't go into coding in this session, but this is where you define all your objects. So we were working with growers and shippers, and they were extending this business entity which has an address and an email. And then...
So those are nodes,
no, those are assets.
the grower and
A node would be like you're running Hyperledger and I'm running Hyperledger and we're sharing a blockchain.
why does
Those are nodes.
the other UI shows participant and the assets, kind of a 2 category.
So all of those, participant is a fancy word for asset. If your asset has security with it, like say we made an asset for you and I as users, and then we want to use that asset as, we want to give you permissions to do something and me permissions to do something, then instead of calling it an asset, you call it a participant. It's just a fancy asset that can be used in a security context. Yeah. But I just wanted to show this. This is the JavaScript version of the code, and you can see that setup demo that we ran. This said creates a resource called USA, and this one in the UK. So that's where that code came from. And then you can set permissions and say that this user can modify data, this one can delete, and whatever. And the other cool thing about this is once you define it, you can export it. So if I hit export, it'll just save it onto my laptop as a BNA file, business network archive. So all these objects together, the assets, the participants, the security, It's called a business network in Hyperledger terminology, and then actually in Composer terminology. And then if I give you that file, it's just a zip file is all it is. But you could install it on your node as well. So the node concept is like who's got the server, the CPU, RAM, memory, network.
That's how you transfer the code.
Those are nodes, and these objects don't even know anything about nodes. They'll run on one node, they'll run on 100 nodes.
That's how you can transfer the code.
These are assets and smart contracts, yeah.
So you are asking something about smart contract, right? What is it specific?
Yeah, how do these smart contracts get executed?
I don't, I know how to execute them, like we just executed them. But at the deeper level, I know like Ethereum has the Ethereum virtual machine, and it's actually an API, and you could write an Ethereum compatible API in Python. And when you execute a smart contract in that Python language, and somebody else has another node that was written in Google's Go language, they're both going to run the same thing. They're going to be compatible. So the smart contract language is happening at that API level. It's not happening on the machine. Like you can't just go to Task Manager in Windows and see, exe so-and-so and see that your smart contract is running, because the smart contract lives in that API. Hyperledger, I'm not sure. I don't think it's that type of thing. I believe the code is actually running on the machine. Like if you're in Linux and you hit PS, you'd see your code. But I'm not sure about that. Like,
That explains why you can write it in JavaScript or Java.
right, you can write it in different languages because it actually runs it in, compiles to the machine, I believe. But I could be wrong, and maybe there is some Hyperledger version, or I guess it would be called a Fabric virtual machine. But I've never heard that terminology. So I believe it's actually running on the machine.
So you want to distribute the contract across all the nodes? You're running the same
Yeah.
smart contract to execute?
You have to have it deployed everywhere, and there's commands for that.
It sounds like these smart contracts are more like scripts that run on your machine and generate transactions that you then broadcast to your other nodes.
This is a great. So this is we teach this in the course, and I can definitely answer this. It's going to take a little bit of time and the whiteboard, but I can let you know like how the consensus process happens and what data flows to where, and how like one party can add a record and everybody gets a copy of it. Yeah, I would love to explain that if you guys are up for that. It's a little deeper than we had planned tonight because this was like an overview, but why not?
Just give me some high level without waiting.
Okay, I'm just going to turn this over here, and the mic's probably not going to work. Whatever.
So that's pretty much what we wanted to share with the team today.
So basically, let's say you've got two companies. We'll just call this Amazon and Walmart, right? So Amazon's got 3 nodes and Walmart's got 3 nodes. And there's no owner to the blockchain, it's just they're sharing this blockchain. So in addition to nodes, Hyperledger has multiple node types. There's this node type that's not really a node called the ordering service. This is not going to work. So I'll just call this order. And the software that actually runs the order is Kafka. So you can set up a Kafka environment, and it has its own nodes. You could set up a couple Kafka nodes here, a couple Kafka nodes here. One goes down, the rest of them will keep going. Now, I don't know if there's one admin password for this, or if they have to share it, or what. There's some talk about like that this is a centralized component in this decentralized blockchain, but we'll just say there's an order. There's also this thing called the client API. So out here you've got your user. So the user says, I want to, and Walmart is going to have its own users, right? And its own client API. So the user says, I want to add a record to the blockchain. The only way you can add a record is that you have to call a smart contract. There's no, like in a SQL database, you can execute a stored procedure, and within that, it'll update the table. Or you can just update the table. In Hyperledger, you have to always call that smart contract. There's no concept of updating directly. So I say, I want to add a record, and this is going to be a specific smart contract called add contact. So call add contact, and it's got my fields first, last, phone, or whatever. The client API is kind of pre-programmed, and it knows some nodes. It has like a cache or something. It can't access these Walmart nodes. This is from the Amazon side. So in its cache, it might only know about these two nodes. These are called like, I don't know, I'll just say they're clients. I forget the name of it. So it knows that these nodes are out there. So it sends the request to a node that it knows of. Maybe it's this one. And this node knows about the whole network. So this network is connected. All these guys are connected in a blockchain. So this node will say, who out here has this smart contract, this add contact smart contract? The nodes that have it are called endorsing nodes. So let's say this one, this one, this one, and this one happen to be endorsing nodes. These are going to be the ones that do the work and actually run the smart contract. They don't store the data on this step of the process. We're just executing code to validate the data. So they send it in to a node that it's aware of. I'll call it the client node. The client node knows where the endorsing nodes are, and it basically takes this message, this add message, and it's got the first name that I want to add, and through this network, it'll send it to all the endorsing nodes. So these guys all have the message. They will all independently run the smart contract. Well, then when they get done running the smart contract, they'll take that signed message and they say, okay, I ran it, and the result was X. This is now a signed message. The other one says, I ran it, this was X. All those signed messages go back to the client API. And the client API will, through cryptography, basically, will decide, is it good enough? Like, did that meet the criteria? Because you can say, if two of the nodes endorse it, then it's good. It's going on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. Or you could say, I need all four, or one from Microsoft, or one from Amazon and one from Walmart. You can set any rules you want. So the client gets the message and it says, hey, I got 4 endorsed messages, they all match. This thing's going on the blockchain. So the client then takes that endorsed, approved thing that it knows is going on the blockchain and sends it to the orderer. The orderer is that queuing service that will send it out to all nodes, not just the endorsers, because the endorsers never wrote the message to their own blockchain. They just endorsed it. At that point, you didn't know if the policy was going to be met or not. So they endorsed it, they sent it back. This guy noticed the policy was met. The orderer agreed that the policy was met. It sent it out to everybody. They also agreed that the policy was, like, they all validate through the security. And then it gets written on all 6 of them. And if this guy happens to be in Tanzania and it takes him, 2 hours to write through a network connection that was down, that's okay. Kafka will handle that. So once the client has sent it to Kafka, it can assume that everybody's going to get a copy. And even if another company comes in a month later and joins the blockchain, this network actually would handle syncing up the blockchain. Mm-hmm. So that's
it's kind of a long, convoluted process, but that's how your chain code, executes, I guess.
Which part of that is consensus? Is it when they all agree that?
When the client, basically, you're gonna have a rule, you're gonna have what they call an endorsing policy.
Okay.
And this rule is kind of everywhere, it's part of that channel or whatever.
Right.
So the client is gonna know what's the endorsement policy, and the client's gonna know what results came back. And it can't just, you can't just have Amazon say, I wanna put this contact and I'm gonna cheat the network. Like, maybe these endorsers, we don't wanna worry about them, we just wanna shove it on the blockchain. They can't do that because the orderer won't accept it, the nodes won't write it unless it meets the security. It's kind of like a multi-sig.
So the orderer does an additional validation that, like,
I don't have the exact answer to that. I'm guessing it would just pass on a properly signed message. Like if you get all the answers back and that's enough information to say, yes, it's going on the blockchain, just like in Ethereum, if I say I want to send you a tenth of an ether, which is $10, all I have to do is sign a transaction with my private key. And I can take that signed transaction and I can put it on Twitter, on Facebook. It will never get double played on the Ethereum blockchain. And whether it actually goes or not, now or later, it's secure because of the signing.
I see.
Once I signed it and published it, it's already considered okay. So the order will take those signed and published messages as transactions and just pass them on to everybody else and they'll apply.
So if any, for whatever reason, there's conflicting rights, right?
Well,
Then the nodes would reject it?
yeah, so if somebody hacked the order and they just started sending messages to the nodes to be written, they would refuse it because they weren't ever signed. They're all working on they have a certificate policy and they know what a signed message looks like. Just like if you hack Twitter or Facebook and you say, well, Ray sent me a tenth of an ether. You never signed it with my private key, so it never happened.
I think the question is more there's kind of a time period between when it's endorsed. The endorsers could endorse different things and they wouldn't realize it because the other one didn't get written yet. So they wouldn't realize it was an invalid right.
Well, they're only going to apply it once. So there's no, if the order for some reason sent the same message to one or all of they're called committing peers. So all 6 of them are committing peers and the 4 of them are endorsing peers. But when you go to write the information to the committing peers, you could send the information twice or 3 times and it won't write 2 or 3 times.
I see.
And it has to be signed. The client IPA wouldn't send it to the order if it didn't think it was going to get written. And the order would...
Well, what if 2 different client APIs decided to delete the same data at the same time by accident?
I think it's possible. Those scenarios do happen. But the problem is this whole thing is a right to the blockchain. But a lot of your rights depend on prior reads. You can't spend $5 unless you check your balance and see that you have at least $5 to spend.
Sure.
So what if you check your balance and you say, yeah, I see the $5, and he checks the balance at the same time and says, yeah, I see the $5, and then you both send a right.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing where your chain code would have to, I don't know the answer. I mean, I could try to think through that and try to answer that, but I can't give you an adequate answer.
So this is one of the reasons, right? We want to create our own nodes. We want to test it out different because when you come to the real execution scenario, there's a lot of conflict detection that happens. Right? Multiple transaction comes in, there's an unsigned transaction come through it. So how do you want to prevent it? So it's a lot of nitty-gritty details. We don't know that unless you just execute it, you're finding out, right? So that's one of our objectives. Okay, how do we can connect and learn as a group. Because you brought up very good three bullet points, right? Everyone has a different way of thinking that use cases on what they are doing it. How I handle this, how I handle this. So we can able to spin up, we can able to do all those simulations. So we kind of thinking about creating a kind of Q&A, kind of a database. So we're collecting all the information to try to put it in the accessible for the community. So they can able to go and search there and they can have the better answers. Because we don't have all the answers. But at least we have the starting point to go